Break Fix's History of Motorsports series is brought to you in part by the International Motor Racing Research Center, as well as the Society of Automotive Historians, the Watkins Glen Area Chamber of Commerce, and the Argetsinger family.
In celebration of 60 years of TransAM racing and the inaugural class of Hall of Famers at Sebring in 2025, we wanted to take you back to 2015 when the IMRRC hosted a panel of notable figures in TransAM's history. Folks like Chuck Cantwell, Dykstra, Don Cox, Woody Woodard, Tommy Kendall, Butch Leitzinger were all hosted by Judy Stropus for a recap of the first 50 years of the TransAM series. This panel covers the history and development of TransAM racing, personal experiences, stories of innovation and trickery in racing, and the evolution of race car technology. The panel also reflects on memorable races, providing insights into their careers, and they discuss the competitive spirit and changes in this unique variant of road racing. Featuring a live audience Q&A, they also touch upon the current state of TransAM compared to its earlier days.
My name is Tom Weedman. If I haven't had a chance to meet all of you, and I can't tell you how delighted we are to have you all here and have this wonderful panel here today. As you know, the Motor Racing Research Center here in Watkins Glen is the archive, and we struggle to be and strive to be the international archive for the history of motorsports, not just in Watkins Glen, but from all over the country and indeed all over the world. So we're going to be talking about TransAM, and now I'd like to introduce another very special person to the International Motor Racing Research Center, Judy Stropus. Judy for many years was the timer scorer for the Bud Moore Racing, also for the AMC Javelin team and the Penske Racing TransAM. She also was the public relations manager for Chevrolet. And it is my pleasure now to introduce and turn this microphone over to Judy.
Welcome everyone. I think this will be a fun panel. We have certainly people from the past and the present who will help decipher all the secrets and all the maneuverings that went on back in the day and probably still go on. So now I'd like to introduce our panel. And because I said we cover the gamut of several years, all 50 years pretty much, although the last few, I don't think we have anybody representing the last few years. So I'd like to introduce Chuck Cantwell. Chuck is a graduate of General Motors Institute in 1956, and he raced in SCCA in the 50s and joined GM Styling as a GM Tech Center as an engineer in 1960. He continued to be an avid SCCA racer. I'm sure you'll all correct me if there's anything wrong about it. Winning several divisional titles in F&D production, then joined Ford Special Vehicles as a Shelby American liaison for a Mustang program. Also working on the GT 350 and 500 programs, spending 3 years in TransAM racing with Shelby. Following a 68 race season, he joined Penske Racing as race shop general manager and team manager for the road racing teams through 73, which of course included the team's TransAM wins in 68, 69 in Camaros and 71 for Javelins. Dykstra. Lee also attended the General Motors Institute and worked for Kendall. He joined Carcraft as a race engineer from 1968 to 70, working on the Ford GT Mark IV and the TransAM program, where he was responsible for the handling package for the Ford ESV safety car. He was also responsible for the design and development of the 1968 to 70 TransAM Mustang, which won the championship in 70. Since that time, he started Decon Engineering, designing the IMSA title-winning Chevy Monza in 76 and 77, designing 19 complete race cars for a number of series, as President of Special Chassis Inc. and Director of Technology for Champ Car World Series. He was race engineer for many years after that for a number of open wheel series. Woody Woodard. Woody worked for Penske Racing for more than 30 years, beginning in '69. In the first 8 years, he was a full-time race mechanic. In particular, he was the chief mechanic on Mark Downey's 1969 TransAM championship-winning Camaro and the 1970 Javelin. He was also chief mechanic on Penske Racing's Sunoco Ferrari 512, the Lola T192, the L&M Porsche 91710, Porsche 91730, and worked on the NASCAR team, fielding the AMC Matador and Mercury Montego. Who remembers those days? Continued to work for Penske Racing and other businesses, was a weekend warrior through '89 on the IndyCar team. He retired from Penske Corp in 1999. Don Cox. Don was Penske Racing's first and only engineer from 1969 to 76. He started his career as an engineer in Chevrolet's R&D department in 1964. He graduated from what he said was Kettering University, but that was originally the General Motors Institute. In 1962, and worked for Chevrolet on the Chaparral project, from 66 to 68, before being assigned to Penske Racing's TransAM project in 69. He left GM at the end of 69 to work Penske Racing's TransAM Javelin program. Through 76, he was involved in all of Penske Racing's projects, including TransAM, IndyCar, Le Mans, Can-Am. He also ended up doing business with Penske and ventured into the Detroit diesel business in 76. He retired in 2001 and now spends his free time driving PCA events in the Northeast, including Watkins Glen. Tommy Kendall. Tommy began his career in IMSA GT, driving a GT Mazda RX-7 and winning the 86 and 87 championships. Later, he won 3 other titles in the same car, which he still owns. Is that correct?
Other people won 3 titles in that car. Jack.
Oh, okay. I didn't think this was that great. He dominated the SCCA TransAM series in the 90s, scoring 4 championships, racing a Chevy Beretta and a Ford Mustang to those titles. In 97, in a Mustang, he won every single race on the schedule except for the last 2, and then represented the series for 6 IMRRC seasons. He's competed in NASCAR, in the Bathurst 1000, and IMSA GTP. In 1991, you might remember, he suffered serious leg injuries at Watkins Glen when a mechanical failure caused his Intrepid GTP Chevy to leave the track and crash head-on into a car wall. NASCAR driver J.D. McDuffie had been killed in the same turn a month later. Both crashes led to the addition of the chicane on the backstretch. He called it a crossroads in his career. He did, however, return racing in 92 and later competed in the Dodge Viper in ALMS. Now he has a broadcasting career, hosting shows on Speed TV in the past and now Fox Sports 1. Butch Leitzinger. Butch finished second in the 2002 TransAM series and ended up as the Rookie of the Year, and it was his only season driving in the TransAM series, racing the Corvette for Tom Boyd. His career includes racing for the Bentley factory team at Le Mans, the Cadillac team at Le Mans, and Panos at Le Mans. He earned victories in the 2010 12 Hours of Sebring, Long Beach, and a podium finish at Laguna Seca, competing in only 4 races that year. He's driven in the ALMS series for a number of teams, and he's competed in NASCAR races, racing 3 times at Watkins Glen with a best finish of 12th in 95. And of course, he's the son of popular IMSA and TransAM driver Bob Leitzinger. So I'd like to start with the elder statesman of the series and of the panel, and that would be Chuck Cantwell. So Chuck, you were originally in the series in 1966 when it started.
In 66, late 65, the SCCA decided to have a series called TransAM. And Shelby involvement was, we had a meeting with George Merwin, Lou Spencer, and myself, and I was assigned the task of doing the homologation papers for the cars for the TransAM in 66. We hadn't built a car or anything yet, so the car was sort of designed within the homologation papers, and we had to run around, take pictures, accumulate dimensions, and get part numbers for all the options we wanted to put on the car. And that was sent to Ford, and all they had to do was paste up a mag wheel on the side of a picture of a regular Ford sedan, because we didn't have any pictures like that to send them. After the first of the year, Shelby gave me a budget of $5,000 to build a car. And that included going to the dealer and buying a car. So we did that. We built a car and then tested it several times, and then ordered 10 more cars initially. And then altogether, we built 25 TransAM cars for customers. We had homologated Group 1 and Group 2 cars, the Group 2 being the TransAM car. Group 1 was sort of a modified Mustang that was a rally car. We built 4 of them to begin with, and they went to Europe and Australia. So we built the cars, and the series was run, first race was at Sebring. A.J. Foyt ran in that race, ran a Mustang of some kind, not one of ours, because most of the drivers at the beginning were independent drivers that built their own cars, and we sold a Mustang, we sold them parts. But they ran, or the first race was one by Jock and Rin in an Alpha, I believe, and the Mustang was second in that race, or Tullius was second in that part. And then the series went on from there. It ran only 7 races in 1966. At the end of the 6th race, Mustang and Chrysler were pretty close in points. Ford asked us to run a Mustang in the 6th race at Riverside. We had a car that I just tested and had been finished up and was ready for sale. Hadn't been bought yet, so we took that car and cleaned it up, took it out to the track with 2 crew guys and ran the race and won the race. It wasn't an easy, it was sort of a wire-to-wire wheel almost, but at the beginning the car wouldn't start and the Le Mans start, and so he didn't get off until the middle of the field. And halfway through the race, he managed to, Jerry Titus was driving, he managed to knock the oil filter loose and came in a big cloud of smoke in the pits, and they changed the oil filter and threw in 4 quarts of oil and hoped that was enough, and he went out and won the race. So that won the championship for Ford and sort of set us up on the line to get a Ford-sponsored team for the 67 season.
I would then jump over to Lee Dykstra, who got involved in, well, we skipped 1967. I may be the only one who was in the 1967 series on, oh, you were, in the TransAM?
I witnessed one.
Oh, I know you were, but besides you.
You had a Shelby team in 67.
No, I know, but I mean, other than you.
Okay.
When I was with the Leadmore Cougar team, and that was an interesting, I was introduced to the Cougar team in Marlboro, I can't even say Marlboro, Maryland, for a 5-hour race, and I got hired by them, and they paid me $25, but after that, we did a great job, in my opinion, and I was hired for the rest of the season. So let's go to Lee Dykstra, who was very important with the Ford effort and Carcraft at the time. So how did Carcraft get involved in TransAM?
So Carcraft got involved because Fran Hernandez, who was a Ford liaison for the Budmore team, got a hold of me because we were doing the Ford long distance cars and essentially a racing engineering shop for Ford, and asked about the rear suspension on the Mustang. Well, it had long upper link in the thing, which wasn't compatible with the leaf spring geometry. So we told him, this is what you have to do to it. And he must have been impressed or something like that, because the next year, then essentially we got a couple of cars from Shelby, 67 cars, and we built the 68 cars, which you may have seen over at the museum. That was one of the cars that we built. So just prior to the 24-hour Daytona, we built the 2 cars, and the 2 cars only were ran by Titus and Bucknam and Horace Queck and Alan Moffett. We came in that race, fourth overall in the thing. The second car with Queck and broke a tower in the thing, so it was a DNF. But Jerry's car ran the whole thing, and I can remember coming to pit stops, and we put so much oil in this car that we needed one of the fuel rigs to feed the oil to. And they would open the door and wipe the floor because there was so much oil in the cockpit that his foot was slipping off the pedals, so we had slipping clutch, slipping brakes, and slipping. From then on, it was sort of, I don't know, it was a good thing that we did that first race because we got our spears up a little bit. But from then on, we got totally beat the whole time because we had an engine that might have been down on power but was unreliable. And then we also were out homologated because the Penske cars had spoilers on the front and rear, and we had nothing. So we spent the whole season eating whatever crow or whatever you want to call it, and vowed to continue on and do this. So we won, I think, 3 races in 1968, and all of them were sort of by accident because we won Daytona, which is fine. The Penske car went out. At Sebring, we lost. We won again with Jerry, actually here at Glen, and we won at Horace Queck at Riverside. And that was about the extent of it. And I've got some stuff a little later. We'll show some pictures of us testing at Riverside, trying to get proper engines. So we had a Gurney Westlake in the car. We had Shelby guys, John Don built proper tunnel port. We tested that. That was good. And then we had spoilers and all that sort of thing that we tested at Riverside and came back strong in '69 with a proper race car.
All right, so Don Cox, as a GM engineer, as a Chevrolet engineer, at the time, while Ford was openly in racing, Chevrolet was still very much everything out the back door in those days, which made it really very exciting. So tell us about your role in that.
This is where it gets really exciting. Lee and I went to college together. Lee and I built 3 race cars together after we got out of college. One of those cars was in the Mossport Grand Prix with people like Pedro Rodriguez, Jim Hall, John Surtees, Lothar Matzenbacher, all these kinds of people. And our car qualified 7th. That's why the Ford guy, Roy Lund, came over, offered all 3 of us a job on the spot. Lee and I went over to talk to him the next week. Lee ended up taking the job. I stayed with Chevrolet because I was working on the Chaparral stuff, and I was perfectly happy there. So in June of '68, I ran into Lee on a ferry boat going across to Wisconsin or someplace in Michigan. Lee was telling me how he was working on the Ford project, and they were homologating all of this stuff, and they were going to beat the guy that was beating him so bad in '68. And I'm yawning and thinking, well, that's fun, that's nice, because I'm working on all this other stuff with the Chaparral and wings and all that stuff, so I was happy. Well, as luck would have it, in March of '69, I get assigned to the Penske project. And I wake up in the morning and I think, oh my God, I'm going to be involved with the TransAM cars. These are the same cars that Lee has been working on all of 1968 to go and beat Penske in 1969. And when we got to the first race, those cars were so fast, they beat us 4 out of the first 5 races, and the lap times weren't even close. So here's 2 guys, went to school together, were in business together, that are exact opposites on the 2 teams. I'm representing Chevrolet and Lee is representing Ford. That was my initiation into TransAM racing.
Well, my question was about the back door, the Chevrolet back door during those early years of racing.
Well, early years of TransAM racing, I wasn't involved in that. Penske was being helped, as a lot of other people, anybody that wanted to be helped, by the Product Performance Group of Vince Figgins and all these people. And it wasn't until March of '69 that John DeLorean became head of Chevrolet. Roger Penske and John DeLorean were big buddies, and Penske insisted on getting help from the R&D group as opposed to getting help from the Product Performance Group, and so that's how I got involved. But at the end of '69, Penske went to American Motors and hired me away from Chevy. But in '67 and '68, he got technical assistance from Chevrolet, but to my knowledge, never got a penny of actual money. And when American Motors came along in '69 and offered Roger, I think in the order of $1 million to run Javelins, that's when Roger switched from Chevy to American Motors.
Jumping back to Lee, because you wanted to talk about how the 3 amigos, or I should say hombres, you, Chuck, and Don got together. So you have some slides you want to show?
One of the things that Don talked about is us building a car. So I've got some photographs just to show you the car, how it sort of evolved. And I tried to do some pictures that sort of tied in some of the panels here. So this is a car that we built in my garage in Ferndale. So essentially that's a Buick aluminum powered C-modified. It had a space frame, it had weighed about 1,300 pounds. Don did the engine, transmission, and the rear Tempest transaxle. The guy driving was Bob Stout, who was another engineer who was in our same class. So he did all the fabrication and welding and that sort of thing. The body came from a place in Minnesota that built, this is sort of looks like a birdcage Maserati. This particular car learned me a lot of lessons because every time it went off the road, some suspension bent or something like that, we had a swing axle in the back with a totally decoupled, but it wasn't any damping involved. Don ended up crashing this car and totally went down.
Which is the best thing that could have ever happened.
It crashed at Waterford Hills because there's a carburetor on the thing and it kept cutting out in the turn. And we wouldn't modify the body to put the proper carburetor on it. So it cut out in the turn. Unfortunately, he ended up totaling the car because of it. The second car we had, Don and I went to Ford, to Jack Passano, and got a Ford engine. And the Cadillac guys were so mad that I had a Ford engine in one of his cars that they offered to build me a proper Cadillac racing engine with hydraulic lifters and 300 horsepower and a 4-barrel carburetor. So we built a car with a Cadillac engine. This is still a front engine car. And this is the one that raced at Mosport, where we ended up qualifying in 7th. The thing obviously looks very nice because of no mold for the body, so it never looked much better than that. But it was pretty fast, and the driver was Glenn Lyle, who some of you might know if it ran Ford Performance for quite a few years. That's how essentially I got into TransAM, because I got the job at Cartwright because of this car.
We'll come back to these slides.
Yep.
But I do want to get to Woody, John Woodard, and his early years with Penske Racing. How did you end up getting that job?
In the mid-'60s, I was working in Annapolis, Maryland as a mechanic at a little sports car shop right in downtown Annapolis. And Marlboro Raceway was less than 20 miles away, and I went to a couple of races and got interested and got my SECA license and invested in a Lotus Super 7 and did a bunch of racing at Marlboro and up and down the east. And in 1967, I happened to attend the Marlboro, I thought it was a 6-hour race, but it could have been a 5 or 3 or whatever. But I'm walking around the infield the first day of practice, and this beautiful blue Chevrolet slant bed truck rolls in with an absolutely gorgeous 67 Camaro TransAM car on the back. Mechanics climb out and they're all dressed neatly in light uniforms, and Mark Donahue gets out of a car and he's Mr. Nice, and it was just a first-class operation. He gets in the car, he qualified on the pole, they started the race, and in spite of Judy's excellent timekeeping with the Bud Moore team, Mark Donahue left the entire field 2 times. Early the next year, I went on up to work for George Alderman in Wilmington, Delaware. Figured out pretty quickly I couldn't continue racing on a mechanic's salary, so I sold the Lotus Super 7, and I'm fixing Rovers and stuff like that for George Alderman. And late in '68, I said, you know, I really like motor racing. I was a pretty decent mechanic. I liked the competition. And I remembered the Penske team that I had seen at Marlboro. Newtown Square was less than an hour away. I get up one Saturday morning. It's the Saturday before New Year's, bringing in the new year of '69. And I go on up the road looking for Newtown Square. And I'm halfway there, and I'm saying to myself, what the hell am I doing? It's the Saturday before New Year's. There's not going to be anybody at Penske Racing. I drive into Newtown Square, find a gas station, ask him where Penske Racing is. He gives me instructions. I go down there, I find the place, the gate's unlocked. There are 2 cars in the parking lot. I drive up, park, knock on the door, and Mark Donahue opens the door. Invites me in, introduces me to Roger Penske. I introduced myself, and I said, you know, I'm a mechanic. I work for George Alderman, who Mark knew quite well, and I'd like to work for you. I spent 2 hours. They walked me around the shop, asking me a lot of questions of what I've worked on, you know, could I overhaul that Muncie transmission, et cetera, et cetera. 2 weeks later, Mark called me and said, I want you to start Monday. And that's how I got my job with Penske Racing. My first job was the Bucknam. There were 2 '69 TransAM chassis that were there. Both had come from the Dipper, and which is a different story. One car had the roll cage installed. Chassis had been painted, but there wasn't a single bolt or rivet attached to it. And Mark was off to a test at GM, and then they were going to the 24-hour at Daytona. And he said, hey, there's the shelves for the parts for this car. Put together whatever you can. And when they came back after Daytona, the car was complete and ready for an engine. I wound up building both. That first car was the Bucknam car, or the 9 car, and then I built Mark's car. I had been hired as Bucknam's chief mechanic. Mark's chief mechanic was Leroy Guine. And the first race was at Michigan, which was quite a race. Judy remembers that one. Mark and Roger and Leroy had a bit of a falling out at the end of the race, and they fired Leroy Guine. And I became overnight Mark Donahue's crew chief. That's how I got my start.
Chuck, talk about your time at Penske Racing and why you moved over from Shelby to Penske.
Well, I'd worked for Shelby, started with the GT350 program and went to the TransAM, 3 years of TransAM racing. 67 we won the championship, in 68 were the lead described. We had cars that weren't very reliable, and it was really a rather hectic season, even though we did manage to win 3 races. Mark won all the rest of them in 68. End of that year, I was wondering what I should do, and I knew that Shelby had 1 more year left in his contract. Since all the big international racing with the GT40s and stuff were done at that time for him, I knew he wasn't too interested. He didn't show a lot of interest in what was going on. He came to the TransAM races, but he went home with this car out here with one. Horse Quick won the race at Riverside, and Shelby went home before the race was halfway over. So I thought, well, the interest wasn't going to be there. In a year, there probably wasn't going to be any job because Shelby Racing would all shut down. So Roger had contacted me after the season was over and asked if I wanted to go to work there. And I agreed to do that. So I went to his house and interviewed, talked to him a while, went to the race shop and looked around and so forth. Pretty easy decision to make, going with a top-class team that had a future to it rather than one that had its future was pretty much gone. So I went to work for them and was very happy to do so.
So we're going to jump a few dozen years, maybe not quite that many, to the later era. And we'll start with Butch, his 1 year in TransAM. But your history goes back to being with your dad, Bob, in TransAM. What did you think about the series at the time as a young person?
Oh yeah, I grew up, a racing family, so it's not like today with racing where you have so many different avenues. You can become, if you're the NASCAR fans, there's only NASCAR truck fans. Back then, if it was racing, you were a fan because it was so little to get. You grabbed onto any bit of racing. Of course, looking at Auto Week and competition news, you would latch on to any information you had. So I followed TransAM all through the years. My dad raced in TransAM in '81. He had raced in SCCA Nationals up until then. The family team had a 280ZX Datsun that he raced. And it wasn't a terribly competitive car. It was a normally aspirated 3-liter engine up against a lot of pretty heavy equipment. Tom Gloy that year came out with a Ford's return to racing with the Mustang. Bob Solis had the Jaguar. Effie Weitz had a Corvette that was very fast. So for my dad's car, it didn't do terribly well. Like in places like Lime Rock or Sears Point where the handling was premier, he would do well. Kind of the ending of his TransAM career was at the end of that year, the rule book came out. And in spite of having a pretty lackluster year, the rules were basically the same for all the cars at the end of the year, but it said specific exception, Datsun 280ZX, normally aspirated, 200-pound weight gain. And there was one 280ZX normally aspirated in the country. So my dad called the competition director at the time and said, I read the rule book here. I said, oh, okay. Did you see what it said? Well, we have to say this. My dad said, no. That says, Bob Leitzinger, we don't want your ass in TransAM. And they said, well, sorry to hear that. So yeah, that was kind of his departure from TransAM. When I did TransAM in 2002, when I told him that I was going to be doing it, he kind of rolled his eyes like, oh no. I hope you know what you're getting into. But yeah, we'll get to that later.
I was going to say, what did you get into? We'll go to Tommy Kendall, the giant killer in the 90s and so. When you came in, clearly the series had tremendous history already. When you came in, did you even consider that history? Because you are a bit of a historian, in my opinion. When you started to race and you were in a Ford and competing against Chevrolet, and then you were also in a Chevrolet in the Beretta competing against Ford. Run the gamut.
Following a little bit of what Butch said, tell people today, try to remember what it was like. There was no internet. There was 3 television channels, and there was a handful of magazines that came out once a month. And so if you didn't know someone that did something, you could live your whole childhood and never know it existed. And so when all of a sudden I got exposed to racing, it's like my head exploded. I subscribed to On Track magazine. So from about 81 on, I know everything that happened, because I used to read that cover to cover. Before that, it took me a while until I got more heavily involved to appreciate some of the stuff that went before that. Ironically, one of the first books I read was Paul Van Valkenburg's book, The Unfair Advantage. And I read that long before I ever drove even a go-kart. The way things work out, and I was hell-bent to get into open-wheel cars. I wanted to go IndyCar racing, and budgets and heights inspired a little bit against that. And I ended up spending my whole life in sports cars, and I couldn't have worked out better. All those years later, to go up against some of those records that were set by some of these guys here, it's funny how that all works out. But when you're young, you don't have a full appreciation for history, but I had an appreciation for what was happening right then. So I started following TransAM in '81, finally got to driving in '85, '86. I did my first TransAM race. There was a picture, and it was focused on Pruitt on the victory stand. I was in a Mobil 1 suit to the right. That was my very first TransAM race. I was racing GTU, and my dad bought that old Gloy Capri that had won the championship in '84. And he said, do you want to run this in Long Beach? And I said, hell yes. And so we didn't know anything about TransAM cars, so I did all the legwork I could. I tracked down Dave King, who had been at Roush. I talked to Willie T. We got as much information as I could. We showed up with our little ragtag team at Long Beach, qualified 3rd and finished 2nd behind Pruitt in the Mercure. the water main broke and it flooded the garage, and everybody except Pruitt crashed in the water. I ended up backing out, lost the front end, finished a lap behind Pruitt, but finished in second. And so that's a story that not a lot of people know. A lot of that focus is on the later years. But, I was fortunate. The late 60s, early 70s were the real glory years of TransAM. But in hindsight, I was honored to kind of be part of the second golden era in the 90s. As my Twitter profile says, I was big in the 90s. And I was just, it's funny how fate works out. Couldn't be more honored. The cars are just kind of the perfect. And each step along the way, they were really right for that era. They were quite a bit different through the years, but they were appropriate for what got people excited. And that includes today. One of the things I say, very few series now have as much power as they used to. Everybody talks about the glory days of Can-Am, big horsepower. The glory days of IMSA GTP, big horsepower. The only series running today where the most powerful cars ever are running today are TransAM. Those cars are like almost 900 horsepower now, 800 some horsepower, and Sprint Cup, they're about 900 horsepower as well. Everything else is less than their glory days, and it's a little news flash to some of the people running these series. If you want to get people excited, people like the big power. So.
Well, tell me about the Beretta team. I mean, that is like an almost forgotten team. It was hard to find anything on Google, and yet I was there. I was part of the Beretta team. Talk about that adventure with Chevrolet.
I was really indebted, to Herb Fischel. He kind of cherry-picked me after I won those 2 GTU championships in the RX-7. I was going to school at UCLA, and he had this idea that race car drivers were going to become more, it was going to be more about marketing, and they needed to be a little bit articulate and so forth. And so he called me out of the blue and wanted to talk to me about a new program at Chevy. And they were more involved in racing, but it wasn't really totally above board. We're proud that we're in racing. And so things were changing. And in '88, they had a production car called the Beretta GTU, and they had a corresponding race program. And so I did that. We won the championship the first year in the Beretta. It was supposed to be 2 years. They said, well, let's switch it over to TransAM. And so that's how the Beretta went into TransAM. The team was run by Cars and Concepts out of Brighton, Michigan. And the person who designed that car was a guy named Trent Jarman. Lovely guy, but he was employed at Cars and Concepts as an engineer designer. They made sunroofs and convertible tops for automakers. And he designed this car, and it was not so hot as you would maybe expect. And so we were throwing huge money at this and didn't get any results. I finished second in the championship just by hanging around. Dorsey, the Roush guys pretty much comprehensively destroyed us. Chevrolet hired Doug Feehan, who's still involved in the Corvette program, to kind of assess the program and give his recommendations. And he came in with this whole list of stuff, which included firing both drivers. And so, fortunately, Herb went to bat for me, and he says, we'll fire one of them, but we will not, we're sticking with Kendall. And so, Bob Riley designed that 90 Beretta, which I look back on it. Back then I convinced myself it looked like a Beretta. It's one of the wilder looking pieces ever. And Judy was part of that program, and we kicked off in fine style. We didn't win a race until Cleveland, but they were adding weight to us even before we won. But won 6 races that year and won the championship away from Roush. And Chris Neifel was my teammate. We were the twin towers of TransAM. Really a cool program, and that GTU stuff, even though I won the 3 championships, TransAM was finally getting into the big leagues, and you were running in front of big crowds. You were the sport race for IndyCar weekends on Saturday. It was really great. TransAM on Saturday. At the Glen, we ran with Winston Cup. One story about that race, which sticks in my craw, one of the races that Neifel won, they were adding weight to us, and so we were kind of starting to manage how quick we were showing in practice, and so it was really getting bad. They'd added weight a couple times, and they said, listen, we're really racing Dorsey. We're not racing the Dodgers. We're not racing anyone else. We're racing Dorsey. So we're going to key off of him. We don't want you qualifying up front. We need to be near the front. And so I think I qualified 5th, which was my worst qualifying all year. And so before the race, Thean says, just kind of watch him. I don't want you leading. If someone else is leading, let him go. Keep your eye on Dorsey, blah, blah, blah. And so I'm running around like 5th place, whatever. And Neifel is going to the front. And he's all over the leader. And then I'm like, technically he's not leading, but it's obvious he could be. It wasn't a very good show, I didn't think. So all of a sudden, I think Dorsey dropped out, or maybe it was the Saisapa car. All of a sudden, I say on the radio, I said, what's the deal? He said, deal's off, go for it. And I'm like, 5th. And Neifel is way out in front. Neifel and Feehan were really, really close for a lot of years. And so there was a little interesting team dynamic going on. So I got on my horse, and I started reeling in Knifel. I caught him on the last lap. I got up next to him on the back straightaway and he ran me into the grass. And we were about to almost wrecked. And I was hot. And so we were on the short course, coming back, and I got partway alongside him, coming into the final corner to the checker. And I felt like I was far enough alongside that if we hit it, it was going to be at least shared responsibility. But something told me that that argument wasn't probably going to hold a lot of water. And so I got out of it. He chopped across. He won the race. And I felt like I'd been kind of hosed. And as racers, everything is egocentric. It doesn't matter team goals. All you're thinking about is how it affects you. So, but Knifel won. That was his first win of the year. I'd won, I think, 4 or 5 at that point. But that was little TransAM related trivia inside story. And then one of his friends was an artist. He did a picture of that. And he wanted me to sign it. I said, I'm not signing.
Over the years, there's obviously been conflicts between the sanctioning group and the race teams and the manufacturers, so I know there are stories. Now, I don't know if Woody's story about oil pan testing at Elkhart Lake has any connection to SCCA's rules, but I know you have a story.
I do have a story. Before I do that, I want to clear one thing up. In deference to my counterparts around me, I never attended nor graduated from General Motors Institute. When Roger signed the deal with American Motors to take on the Javelin project, it was a big project because there wasn't much to start with. The Kaplan prior team was really all they left was piles of junk in Southern California, and we really had to start from scratch. There was an engine program in place from 67, I believe, 68, where Traco had built the AMC motors, and they were pretty successful at it. They had good power. In 1969 and 70, you were not allowed to dry sump. The rules were a stock oil pump and basically a stock oil pan, although they didn't bother you too much on the oil pan. We used the stock oil pump and we took our best shot at the oil pan, and we learned that in racing or testing, if there were some long corners on the carousel at Elkhart Lake or the like, we were losing engine bearings. We were losing oil pressure. It cost us a number of races early in the 1970 season. And Mark decided that we needed to fix it, do something. You couldn't remove the oil pan in the Javelin without pulling the engine. And he had me take one of the 2 race cars and cut the center section out of the front cross member and put flanges on it so I could bolt the cross member in and out. And he got 5 different aftermarket Southern California hot rod types to build 5 different configurations of oil pans. One of them was actually a big circle that had the oil pump feed came out of the center, and it was in a bearing that had this big thing swinging around no matter what direction it went. Anyway, that one didn't work. But we went to Elkhart Lake for 3 days of testing, and we tested oil pans. And back then, we didn't have recorders. And Mark says, I can't drive the car and watch the oil pressure gauge. Unless I can, but then I can't go as fast as I need to go to see if we can destroy the engine. So he says, you're going to have to ride in the back. So I would change the oil pan, and then I'd climb in the roll cage, and there was no seat back there, and there was no seat belt. I would kind of look like a monkey with a roll cage looking right over his shoulder, and he would go out and do laps through that carousel. I mean, just absolutely as fast as he was qualifying, and I'd watch the oil pressure gauge. And I'm up, down. I think we tried 4 different oil pans, and we finally came up with one that would live through the carousel, and we went home, and I don't believe we ever failed another engine, but I was black and blue for a month.
Now, every team has 1 or 2 or 3 DAGs, data acquisition geeks. That was a data acquisition stud.
I did a similar thing, Mark. We were trying to learn something about pressures and airflow and on the car, and so we were at, I think it was Donnybrook. I didn't really know about this before, but apparently it was something that Donnie played on everybody. But I ended up strapped into the back of a Camaro using the same straps that you would tie the car down with in the trailer. And trying to read these manometers as he was out driving. And it became kind of clear early on that this wasn't working so well. So the plan was that we would go out and try to run at constant speed down the straightaway. You know, so many RPM, constant speed for the length of the straightaway. And then we'd go in and make changes and then go back out and run the same constant speed and try to see if we got any difference in these water manometers. This is the crudest thing you could ever imagine. But Donahue grew impatient with the whole process, so he just started driving really fast. I'm back there scared half to death. And I looked up one time and we were going down the straightaway, and we're not going the standard, 100 miles an hour. He's just flat out. And I'm seeing RPMs of 7,500. I look at the turn coming up, and I look over at his helmet, and I look at the turn coming up, and he's not moving, and I'm convinced that he's dead. And all at once, the car, he jumps on the brakes, the car slows down and turns. To this day, I wake up in the middle of the night.
I have a story similar. During the TransAM series with the Camaro, winning at Riverside, when Mark won at Riverside, I think that clinched the championship. And it would be the only time that I said that I would ever ride in the passenger seat with the flag. And so they put me in there, pictures of me being pushed in and dragged out, because as soon as Mark saw it was me in the passenger seat and I was given the flag to hold, I held on to that flag so hard, and he drove a regular, normal TransAM racing lap with me in the passenger seat without a seatbelt. And when we got back, the flag was in tatters. It was totally destroyed, but I held on to it till the bitter end. But that was Mark. He was a prankster for sure.
Oh, I think that's a driver thing too, because I rolled around in the car, squatted on my haunches in the front seat with George Fulmer going around mid-Ohio, and we were third on the grid at the time with me in it. But along Woody's stories, we have some good oil pan stories too, because essentially the Ford engine sits in front of the crossmember and the oil pan section is in front of the engine. So essentially whenever you accelerate, all the oil goes to the back and you lose the oil pressure. So Ford had this miraculous electronic sensor so they could tell when it was bad and this sort of thing. They said, you got to do something with the oil pan. It became a competition between Carcraft and Ford engine and foundry, because both of us were trying to do a proper oil pan for the thing. We at Carcraft, we had an oil pan with a little plastic thing over the top in the back of a station wagon. So we had different little sensors. One of the pickups, one of the things like Woody was saying as far as on a pivot, so it could pivot around. Another one we had was from a jet aircraft that sits in one of the oil tanks there, and it's like a lead weight on the end of a flexible thing, which the Ford management called the Dick Pickup. And we, got dizzy riding in the station wagon, watching the oil move around, that sort of thing. So the final solution was the guy that was my design guy came up with a double oil pump driven by the same shaft, and then we had a pickup in the back of the thing, plus various windows and that sort of thing. So essentially part of the oil pan picked up in the back and dumped in the front, and then the proper oil pan pump could pick it up. Well, Ford E&F at the same time designed this cast aluminum pan, and it was near Christmas, and one of the Ford guys came in and he was on crutches, and Fran Hernandez said to him, "What happened? You dropped your oil pan on your foot?" And that oil pan never saw the light of day because it was about 60 pounds, something like that.
I want to stage a revolt against the 1970 TransAM because you had a cheating oil pump. You were only allowed one.
It's a two-stage
Speaking of cheating and the loopholes and the rules and all of you. I think all of you were involved. I know the early guys were. I can't speak for the later. But that was one of Roger's great calls, is to read the loopholes and work them to the team's benefit. So I know all of you had something to do with that. What about acid dipping and all of those things?
We were at the LA airport, and there was some chassis sitting there that were going to be shipped back to the Midwest. And so they were acid dipped and they were Camaros. And we rode on the thing. This chassis is not legal for TransAM racing.
I have a funny dipping story. And this
Funny
is,
dipping story.
I believe everybody dipped their cars back then. Posey's cars were dipped, and I know Chuck's cars were dipped, right?
Not,
No.
well,
No.
Doesn't expire.
halfway through.
My story. We did acid dip the 69 Camaros, and right when we finished painting them, we never noticed the roofs were a little bit rippled. Didn't look quite right. We had no time to replace the roofs. So Mark went down the street and got one of these Landau roof guys to come in the shop, and they put rubber roofs on both cars. And we went off to the races with a Landau roof on the two Camaros. And the Ford guys didn't like it. And they're complaining to John Tamanis, the head of technical inspection, just the greatest guy. And he come over and asked me, Woody, off the side, what's with the rubber roofs? And I said, it makes it look good, Roger. So we get to about the fourth or fifth race, and we're beating a bed. And Ford was really putting a lot of pressure on the SCCA. And Tamanis comes over to me again, gets me off to the side. Woody, you got to tell me what's going on with the rubber roofs. And I said, John, I can't believe you ever figured it out. It's a golf ball effect. And he looks at me and he says, what do you mean golf ball effect? I said, have you ever held a golf ball? Yeah. Doesn't it have little dimples all over it? He says, yeah. I said, John, that creates lift. And he just walked away shaking his head.
Well, I have a similar story. As a Chevrolet representative, I had a fleet of Chevrolets and usually Camaros in New York City to give to media to write stories about. And at the same time, Jim Hall was running the Chaparral Camaros. And they were being sort of checked by SCCA. SCCA would never go to the manufacturer to get what they think was accurate information because they didn't trust the manufacturers to give them accurate information. So Jim Hall shows up with a head with splayed valves in it. And they said, that can't be stopped. So I go to a party somewhere in New York. I don't know what event it had to do with. And John Tamanis was there. And I drive in with one of my Chevrolet cars, and it's a Camaro. And John says, oh, let me take a look at that car. He opens up the hood. He looks in, and he says, oh, dang, it's got splayed valves. He says, that you were put up by the Chevrolet to bring this car to this party. I know it. And I swore that's what they believed. But it was clearly not true. It was, even when I raced the Chevy Monza, they wouldn't believe that I was a Chevrolet representative and I gave them the stats and the technical details about the car, and they wouldn't believe me because I represented Chevrolet in any event. So coming back to more recent, in your 1 year, Butch, you had some issues, traction control.
Yeah, it was a very interesting year. I drove the Tommy Bahama Corvette for Tom Lloyd. The first 2 or 3 races I did a pretty poor job. But then we got on a roll and we won a few races in a row. At that time, this was 2002, traction control was the kind of magic. If you had traction control, you would win everything. I never actually saw it, but apparently in Speed Sport News, somebody advertised that's like a chip, just something that you kind of like put on your MSD box, on the little, ignition box, and it gave you traction control. So it was supposed to be like this big, you could hide it in your pocket. So everyone was convinced if someone did well, they obviously had traction control. We were at Trois Rivières, and I won. Afterwards, we pulled on the track in front of the pits, and I got out, and no one was there, which was kind of odd. And I looked over and I saw the team was kind of corralled over in this area. So I ran over to them, like to high five and stuff. They all just kind of had their hands in their pockets and were kind of standing there. So, and then an official said, "Get out of here! Get back over there." This is really weird. I walked back over to the car, and then there was an ambulance parked there. And they said, "Go into that ambulance." This is really weird. But the victory circle was on the other end of the street, and I thought, well, maybe they're just going to give me a ride down there. So I was getting in the back of this ambulance. I closed the door behind me. These 2 people, doctors in the front, gave me this look. And one of them said, "We're really sorry about this, Butch." What the hell have I gotten into? And they made me do a strip search. Got this thing on me somewhere. It took a little bit of the shine off the race, I have to say. Anyway, they didn't find anything, obviously. They tore the car down quite a bit. They took the MSD boxes. They're going to send them out to testing, and then the next race was, I think, Road America. we got there, and they were supposed to be returning the MSD boxes. Well, we don't have them yet. Bill Fingerlow, who's our team manager, said, well, instead of having to buy new boxes, we have 2 from last year. Can we use those? And apparently, from the year before to this year, you have to use this spec MSD box, but the year before you were allowed to put silicone all over it to keep the bits from rattling off, but the year I was racing you couldn't. But they said, well, we've got these from last year, can we use these instead of making us buy new ones because you didn't get finished? So they said, okay. So we got through that weekend. The next weekend in Denver, after the race, one of the other teams looked at our MSD boxes and said, hey, those aren't the spec MSD box. And the SCCA guy, the tech guy, who approved it, said, oh yeah, you're right. So that started off this long legal thing. Tom actually hired a lawyer and spent a lot of money, basically for the rest of the year going through appeals and things. I think what ended up happening is they did one of these, well, you weren't really at fault, but you were still kind of at fault, so they gave us the win back, but they took points away or something like that. So, and really, the net effect of all of it was that Tom Glow got so fed up with everything that he just packed it all in at the end of the year, and that was it. But it was a very, very interesting year.
And your dad said, that's what they did to me when they told me that. Now, I have to ask you, was Paul Gentilozzi in the series at Trickery? That's usually where these things start.
Yeah, he was pretty good about kind of pointing the finger around. It was a little bit of Richard Petty syndrome, I think. They must be cheating because I'm cheating and they're beating me.
Well, the traction control thing didn't start in 2002. I first started getting it in 1990 with the Berettas, and we had this separate fifth wheel chaparral, and that's where the Chevy engineers worked out of, and that was their office. Everyone was convinced that this was NASA control. And this is where all the stuff that was being manipulated, and that's where the traction control was being beamed to space or something. And so they came up with this idea that one of the races, I think it was Road Atlanta, right before the start of the race, they were going to go over there and they put a padlock on the trailer, and they said, you guys can't go in there. And they said, okay. And we won, and the car still ran, and so forth. So that's where the traction control started. In '97, when we were on that streak, it reached a fevered pitch, and the car got torn apart every single weekend. And finally, between races on like a midweek, there was a call at the shop at Roush, and they said, we want to inspect your car at the shop. And they're like, okay. They're like, when? They're like, right now, we're here. And they did a sneak attack, and we're like, knock yourselves out, And so they went, did all this stuff. And Jim Losey is a smart guy, but what he does is he observes something, and then he works backwards and creates this crazy, I'm not sure there really was a module for sale in Speed Sport News, but when he tells the story, he'll say, I know it, you can buy it, I've spoken to the guy.
Actually, that was one of the things that Boris told me. Boris said was racing at the same time. We raced at Cleveland in qualifying. This was my first time at Cleveland, and I did a poor job of reading the schedule. I went out and set a time, and my plan was to come in, bleed the tire pressures down, and go back out for a second run. So I did a time, came in the pits, and Tom Gloy puts the winter net down and said, what are you doing? It's a 10-minute session. And put the fear of God into me. They put the thing up, and I got out of the pits really quick, and I set a time, and I got on pole. But Boris told me that Paul came over to him afterwards and said, did you see that? They're totally cheating. Because he came in the pits, they just took the winter net down, put the winter net back up. And then he gets pole somehow. Boris was a good guy. Just looked at him with a dead face and said, oh, well, they're cheating.
Well, Tommy, I do remember one point when SDCA was penalizing drivers for being too fast, right?
It was kind of what's evolved. It's out of control today. It's what BOP is today, balance of performance. Back then, they wouldn't do it every race, but they would kind of tell you. At one point, it was if you stick up the show and you get too big a lead, we're going to put up the pace car and so forth. And so, but that 1990 season, they added weight. We had a splayed valve, fuel-injected V6 Beretta. One thing I learned is you don't want to be the only person running a package because it's easy for them to zap you and slow you down. And so that they added weight to the point where at the end of the year, we were with the V6, we were the exact same weight. Chevy, we were battling for the championship, and so they ran a third Beretta with R.K. Smith, and they went back to a non-splayed valve head with a carburetor, and that allowed the car to run 175 pounds lighter. That's where I gained my appreciation for weight and the effect on performance, because RK ran the car at Mid-Ohio. We clinched the manufacturer's title, or the driver's title, at Mid-Ohio. And then we get to Elkhart on the test day, and RK he was a Formula car guy. He didn't have a lot of experience with sedans, so he said, RK wants you to drive his car and make sure everything's in the window and so forth. So I got in his car and I went out on a Thursday, and I went out for 3 laps, and I came in and I told Dan Biggs, my crew chief, I said, I'm racing this car. He says, what do you mean? I said, I'm racing this car. This thing is so much faster. And it had less power. It was 175 pounds lighter. And I raced that car, and it was one of the easier wins I ever had. I remember going down the straightaway into turn 5 with some of the Mustangs and stuff. I remember just looking at them, not even really paying that much attention to the brake markers, thinking, I'm just going to wait until they brake. And when they brake, then I'll brake. And that's how I worked my way to the front. And so I own that car today. It's how it drove off the racetrack at St. Pete. But I get that why you want to try to equalize, but it just kind of underscores that it's really, really hard to do any sort of equivalency formulas in racing. And I really think they need to figure out a better way than BOP to do it. Basically, where it got to in the 90s was everybody ran a 300-inch, same carburetor. Then if you're getting beat, you're just getting beat. And so it opens the can of worms where whoever's there last threatening to withdraw gets the extra sugar. It was a nightmare. Part of the deal, it wasn't too bad. When you're in the middle of it, you think it's the worst thing ever and they're all out to get you and so forth. So one thing I've learned up here from this, Roger Penske, if you sponsored his cars, you were going to win races and you were going to lose people at the end of the year. Because it looks like he poached people and they stayed with him for the rest of the time.
Roger was excellent at that. In fact, many of the people who are still with him or have retired recently were there early on, and he snatched them from American Motors, from Sears, from Chevrolet. He has a great knack of putting the right people together.
Was Roger always together? There got to be some moments where he showed up and his hair wasn't combed. No?
Never happened.
Never happened. I did a Facebook Live this morning, and I looked in the mirror afterwards, and my eyebrow was like all crazy. I slept on it. And I just did a broadcast to 5,000 people, so I could never drive for Roger. That's probably why I never drove for Roger.
I did see him drink a glass of wine once.
So I was just at an event this weekend. I met someone and said, oh, well, I saw Roger Penske at NASA. I was walking by and he said, hey, guy, can you give me a hand? And he was the only guy on his car. And he said, could you tape my helmet, please, because I can't see with the sun shining in the eyes. So this guy's shining moment was to put 2 strips of tape on his visor so he could see in the sun.
This might be a good time to jump again to current season.
This year during the Petit Le Mans, a lot was made about Christina Nielsen being the first female major motorsports champion in America, and that was not true because Amy Ruman was. All privateers now. There's no factory involvement there, and it really takes you back to when you first got started. And those teams, it's her dad, it's her sister, it's her, and I mean, the extra few bucks for an extra West Coast race and all the things. And so she just really kind of, the core appeal of TransAM has always been the privateers that support. And they're the ones that have kept it alive because the factories come and go. And so it's cool to see they have the big fields, and she touched on that big power. Those things are nasty, those new cars. And like every driver, your car's your favorite car. So, you always picture it, the new season, the new paint job, what it's going to look like. And like Junior Johnson said, I've never seen an ugly car in Victory Lane, so.
We'll be doing questions in a little while, but just a couple of leftover items. If Lee Dykstra, you had some other slides you wanted to show?
I included some of the guys on the panel there. So here's Chuck testing at Riverside, essentially with a 68 Mustang. Now this is the car that you see in the museum or the sister to it. And we're testing aero stuff at Riverside as long as you can see the little bubble in the hood. So that was a Gurney Westlake engine in the thing. So trying to give the driver an idea of something, a proper motor in the thing, as opposed to the tunnel torque Ford, which had 0 torque from about 0 to 7,000 RPM. So this is our first 69 car coming out of the shop at Carcraft. Judy is probably familiar with it because this is the car that somehow or another the SCCA scoring missed a lap, and Parnelli did an extra lap before he got the checkered flag. Timing and scoring stuff happened to be in Rogers' plane heading out right after the race. This is the car we built for Smokey Unick, absolutely for a Ford vice president type of thing. It had to be absolutely perfect, and it never ran and got cut up by torches to run on a circle track. So. Okay, so this is actually the first car test in the Lockheed Wind Tunnel in Atlanta. They didn't have the ability to drive the car into the tunnel, so we had to drop it from the ceiling through a hole in the tunnel. So here it is, about 60 feet in the air, supported by the 4 cables as we're dropping it in for the aero test. Okay, so there's a hole in the tunnel to drop the car through the ceiling. Here we are standing underneath it. So you can see Fran Hernandez over here. It's myself in the center, and Mitch Marshy, who is my design engineer under it. So we're lowering the car into place, and now they can drive the car in the tunnel, and everybody and his brother is testing it in the Lockheed Tunnel. But some of this stuff you probably haven't seen. I think this is in one of the TransAM books or something that people have, as far as some of the additions we had in the front spoiler trying to get front downforce in the car. The adjustable rear wing on the back, that's that full chat there. So we ran through the angles as far as the rear wing is concerned. Okay, so this is a windshield wiper test. You can see the wiper straight up, so that's the minimum drag position for the wiper. Now there just happens to be this funny looking thing on the roof there, which sort of looks like the rear wing that was on the back there. One of the Ford guys thought that maybe you could put downforce in the middle of the car this way so it was balanced. Needless to say, it didn't quite work because the air sort of flowing the wrong direction there.
All right, thank you. And I think, Chuck, did you have something to add and some slides to show?
66 season was the first season, and that was run pretty much by independent people. A.J. Foyt drove in the first race at Sebring. It was only a 7-race series. The cars had to have the complete interiors, including back seats and all the floor mats and everything, all the carpeting. So they were sort of a strange thing from what people had been racing before. And they had a single carburetor, which gave about 350 horsepower. For 67, when the teams got involved, SEC allowed larger wheels. They had to be homologated cars, but they had larger wheels and 2 carburetors set up, 400 horsepower. That's what we raced with. The season started for us in the Mustang. We got our cars late in the year after the first of the year and had to build up 2 cars to get to Daytona in February, which was pretty strict schedule. We didn't even have time to paint the cars. We ran them there, blew a tire on the banking, and managed to save it at 160 mile an hour, which was probably a good deal because the only safety structure we had in those cars at that time was a roll bar, and that wouldn't have done much good if you went into the fence. The Sebring race, we got the cars painted, and Titus was on the pole. He beat the pole time from the year before by 18 seconds. And, Marnelli was right behind him, and Thompson right behind him. So, but all the cars were much faster than they'd been the year before. The next race at Green Valley, Titus rolled the car in the afternoon, tore it up really badly, and the crew worked all night on it and rebuilt it. And it looked like a new car when it came back on the track. That was a real hot race, and we didn't have one. And so we went through the season. We got punched pretty badly at Briar in the rain and lost that car. By the end of the year, after the last race, next to the last race at Stardust, Donahue had won 2 races. Shelby and the Mustang had won 4 races, and the Cougars had won 4 races, so the points were very close. We went to the last race at Kent Raceway. Titus had a practice crash which really destroyed the car, the one they overnight fixed for that car. So Bucknam drove our other team car, of course, and Titus drove John McComb's car, which blew up. So during the race, anyway, Mark Donahue in the Camaro ran away with everything. And so the championship boiled down to who got second place, whether a Cougar or a Mustang. Marnelli had blown up, but before he blew up, he'd showered Gurney's windshield with rocks. And Bucknam's car was overheating, but Bucknam was in second and Gurney was in third. Bucknam trying to keep the car from blowing up, and Gurney trying to keep the windshield from falling in on his lap. And so they ran around that way, and Bucknam ended up getting the second place, and that gave us the championship for Mustang with a 2-point edge. It was the best. They had 12 races that year, and they took the best 9 out of the 12 races. And we had a 7-point advantage on Gross, but when they took the best 9, we were down to 2-point lead. So it was a really close championship. The Cougar tech inspection at the end of a race was they would take the car off the track and weigh the car. Bud Moore convinced the stewards that everybody started the race on brand new tires. He would like to put new tires on the car before they went and weighed the cars. But what they didn't know is that the new tires that Bud put on a car were half full of water. Then they had a little weight, and then at one race they found a helmet in the passenger seat with a bar of lead in it.
I was walking with Bud Moore to the inspection, and he was walking with the weights all in his pockets, and they were hanging. And I said, "What?" Chatting with somebody who's throwing into the helmet. And Charlie Raines walked up and said, "Oh, we got to move that helmet." He picks up the helmet and drops it on the floor. It was very funny, yeah.
Yeah, and they didn't do anything about this kind of violation because the competition was so good, and the whole racing scene was so attractive. The TransAM cars, they were really a fun car to watch for the spectators and for anybody that was involved with the cars. It was just the beginning of as you heard here, how it's progressed up and down over the years. It was certainly a good beginning for the TransAM series.
Great. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you very much. And we'll open it up. Question, please raise your hand if I can see you. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Judy. You talked about acid dipping bodies. Were there acid dipped engines too?
No, not to my knowledge. No, the bodies at White were trucked out. I believe there was only one company that could do it, and it was in Torrance, California. Bodies in White would be shipped out there. I witnessed 70 cars being dipped. And with Mark, they would only do it at night because there was it looked like it would have been a cloud of mustard gas going up, but they didn't do it in the daytime.
Well, in Donahue's book, it talks about a series of engines taken off the line at Tonawanda in Buffalo and acid dipped, and then taken back to be put back on the line to be finished, and that they were painted pastel colors. You don't know that story?
I was never involved there. I don't recall ever hearing about it.
Okay.
And I've read Mark's book a couple of times, don't recall reading about it.
Well, it's in there, and I went to Tonawanda for a tour a year ago, and talked to the history guy there, and he said, must have happened on a weekend.
I think those engines, when they came to Chevrolet, were Mark lost track, or Chevrolet lost track of them.
Yeah.
So he never got the damage for the use those.
Are any of you guys working with historic TransAM to ensure that the cars continue to be illegal?
I have been asked to look at a couple of cars to give my judgment as to whether they were our cars. And I've done that on a number of occasions. All of our Camaros, two missing up until recently. The Bucknam car from '69 was sold to a Mexican businessman, and it was in a storage in an underground garage under a tall office building when the 1984 earthquake in Mexico City came down, and it's down there a few hundred feet still, never to be seen again. The one missing '67 car, which went to Germany, was just acquired in pieces by Pat Ryan, and it is now in Asheville, South Carolina. All the rest are alive and well. I think most of them are in Southern California. I've seen all of them. They're all painted Sunoco blue, and not one color matches the next one.
Can anybody offer any credence to the story that, and I don't know the race, but I think it was Donahue and Fulmer both qualified the same car for the race?
Donahue and Fulmer were never on the same team in TransAM.
Donahue and Fisher. But Donahue qualified, I think, at Sebring, both cars for himself and for Fisher. And the cars were different. One of them had vents and one of them didn't have vents, but they just changed the numbers and nobody paid attention to the vents.
If you clear up any of you on the stage, the old Hertz Rent-A-Racer and Light at Brock Yates just passing away, wasn't there a story about they took a Shelby 350 and actually raced it, sent it back to Hertz after the race? Or is that a figment of my imagination?
Well, there were a lot of stories about Hertz cars being raced. We don't think any of them are really valid, but in one race, Tom Yeager borrowed the carburetor off of John Bishop's GT350 Hertz car that he had and used it on his race car. And I think the Marlboro TransAM that happened.
Brock could have started the story.
He could have.
He would. He's a script writer, was a script writer, an excellent one, and of course used editorial license every time.
When you're talking about the acid dipping, I guess that's to take weight off of the metal. The Corvettes that you've seen here, do they have fiberglass bodies like the street cars? So you wouldn't do acid dipping with the Corvette, I guess.
Eventually, they transitioned to removable fiberglass and then carbon fiber bodies. So all the cars had fiberglass later on, starting in probably the late 70s.
When my dad did it, it was still utilized.
It was still
It was like
utilized.
probably 82, 83, something like that.
Okay.
When you're talking about that performance equalization and all these formulas and this and that, I mean, it seemed like metal body race cars and fiberglass race cars would be, did they run in separate classes, or, I mean, it
You
seemed
had a
like two
minimum
different
weight
things.
that everybody had to meet, but what the acid dipping would do is it would get the weight and you could put it down lower in the car. So you would get
Lower the center of gravity?
It lowers the center of gravity, yeah. And I mean, they're obsessive. I mean, they were pretty obsessive, obviously, even back then. So it continues today, the lengths they'll go to. This is not TransAM related, but I heard that Formula One had to pass a rule probably 15, 20 years ago now, prohibiting the teams from using depleted uranium as ballast because it was so much denser. You would think that common sense, that if it's faster, someone will do it. And if someone does it, everyone has to do it.
That's a one way to get rid of the radioactive waste.
Yeah.
We Ford did lightweight stamping, so essentially we didn't have to do the acid dipping as far as fenders, hoods, glass, all these sorts of things.
Yeah, on those beautiful Bud Moore cars, I remember one of the guys that owned one that you could like literally bend the deck lid with your finger. It was just really light gauge metal. I drove Parnelli's car. Ford brought us both to the proving grounds in I think probably 96 or 97. And Parnelli drove my car and I drove his car. The seat, it only came up to about here. Now, granted, I was taller than Parnelli, but my shoulder blades were over the seat. And there was a lever down here that the seat belts went into this cord, and the cord went down into this little mechanism. And when you flip this lever, it would unlock so that you could reach forward and he could get to the switches and maybe wipe the windshield when it was before. And then you go back here and lock it down. And I was thinking, that doesn't seem terribly safe. And I drove that car, and I'm like, man, I had admiration for Parnelli before that, but after driving that car, I said, man, what an absolute stud. And underscoring that, he got out of my car, and he was, let's see, this was almost 20 years ago, so he was in his 60s. He says, if I knew they were this easy to drive now, I'd still be driving.
Tommy, you mentioned that you still own one of the Berettas. Do you have a plan to get that out of any vintage races or anything like that?
I do. It's funny. I had them all socked away, and my dad called me and said, you got to get all this crap out of here. And it was good because it was like a barn find, but it was all my own stuff. And so, I mean, I found I knew I had those cars, but I mean, in terms of some trophies and posters and stuff like that. So I shipped all of them. I have four-mile race cars, my first 5 championships represented, and I shipped them all back to Dan Binks in Michigan. Goal is to get them out for some vintage racing. But every time he calls me, it's at least $7,500. So I said, just space these calls out. And I sound like a total jerk because I didn't have to pay for anything when I was doing it. And I didn't care what it cost. I mean, what do you mean you don't have to put new brake rotors? We need new brake rotors. And so I'm hoping to get some of them out. The first one that's going to be out, the RX-7 that I won my first 2 GT titles with, nobody has seen that. It's the winningest RX-7 in history, and no one has seen it in almost 30 years. And so it'll be at Amelia Island next year in the show, and then hopefully a race shortly thereafter. The Beretta, all those cars, fortunately, they don't have to be put back. Like a lot of cars, you have to kind of reconstruct what they were because they had a different body or different this and different that. Those are all like they drove off the racetrack, and that Beretta has 1 year on it. The sister car that I drove more of the season, the former president of Cars and Concepts sold that to Bruce Canepa last year, and so it's been out a little bit. There's only 3 of those Berettas, they're all accounted for, but the Beretta is probably the closest to being ready to race. Needs everything that has rubber in it. It needs to be fixed and changed, air equipped and stuff like that. Yeah, the goal is to get them out for a race or 2 here pretty soon.
Butch, being the young rookie that you were that year in 2002, what other tracks besides Cleveland was your first time at?
Long Beach. Let's see. There was a race at Washington, D.C. around RFK. That was really cool. Miami was a new event. It was new to everyone because it was the first year of that. Actually, Miami was horrible. This one parking lot that they took the track to, and somebody decided to put a sealer down, like probably a week before, and it was absolutely, you couldn't stand up in it. And like, no matter what you did, every time you go through it, you'd scare yourself to death, and you come through it and go a little bit slower, and you'd still scare yourself just as badly. So it finally just became, well, we might as well go fast, because if we're going to crash, we might as well make it big. But yeah, but Cleveland, though, that was the coolest track. I don't know how you felt about Cleveland. And that was the only time I ever got to race there. And it was so much fun, because it was, most tracks, the line of the track is very kind of obvious. You ride there, and within 3 laps, you kind of figure it out. At Cleveland, you're just given this expanse, and you could be approaching it from way over there, or you could go the shortest route. You just had so much freedom to kind of try different things. The Cleveland Airport. And also, if you were racing somebody, you could be 100 feet on the other side of the track from them. So they'd be looking at their mirrors trying to find where you were and not have any idea. I hope that they put it together, and it'd be great if IndyCar went back there.
Try it. Give it a try.
Was there really any advantage to cooling the fuel with dry ice?
Yeah, that's sure there was. The fuel would become more dense, and you could get more fuel energy into the car. We did that in Indianapolis for I don't know how long. I mean, everything you do, they ban it eventually. But we used to have big saddlebags that we put on the fueling rig, and we filled those saddlebags with dry ice, and there's all kinds of stuff that we...
You get more in, and as it got burned and heated up, there was more in the tank than you could get in without pressurizing.
And Indy, the drivers particularly liked it, because as soon as you put fuel in the car got really cold.
What's the percentage? I don't know what the percentage is. It would be small. But that's my tip for people. Fill your car up at night. Couple percent.
And how about the mile-high fuel rate that was banned after the first race?
Well, those are such obvious things to do now.
Yeah. There was no rule about how high the fuel cell could be. It had to be fed by gravity. So Penske made one that was 30-some feet tall.
24, I believe.
24. And I remember that from reading the book. When the fuel stopped, there was so much, I don't know what caused it, but it basically would whip the end of the fuel line and knock the fuel.
What really happened, we had the fuel tank up really high, because the higher it is, the higher the pressure is, the faster the flow. What the refueling guy would do, he had a hose, a 3-inch diameter hose, and he would jam it. The door on the top of the fuel cell was no longer something you had to unhook and open. It was simply a door that, as you came down with the hose, the door would just spring-loaded down. The fueler would stab the nozzle into the hole. Donnie would count to 4 and leave. As he left, the fueler would just pull the hose out, fuel everywhere. So we put 22 gallons of fuel in about 4 seconds.
The 24-foot rig was only used one time. That was at the Michigan race in '69. They banned it right after that. It comes back to 12. But Don Lee, who used to own one of the '69 cars out in San Francisco area, and an avid vintage racer on the West Coast, made a replica of the 24-footer right down to the paint scheme, except same tubing and everything. And he took it to a vintage race in Laguna Seca. And they didn't put fuel in it, but they put some colored water or something like that, and did a test into a fuel cell, and it was like 3.2 seconds, and the fuel cell was blown up. It still exists out there.
SCCA changed the rules from the thing to made a rule that after they did their cell, that the valve had to be at 6 foot off the ground. So we did a cell that was still 24 feet in the air, as far as a 50-gallon drum, but then a steel tube came down to the valve, so the valve was at 6 feet. So that would also dump fuel in 3.5 seconds, which we did in the back of our Carcraft parking lot. In the '69 season, it sat for most of the race, but someone in their infinite wisdom decided that they're going to have this thing at one of the races on the West Coast, which I think was Kent, Washington, or one of those. So we set up that rig, and the first time it got tested in a race was at the race itself. When he put the thing into the fuel for the first time, the fuel came in so fast that there was steel balls venting on either side for the fuel tank. The flow of the fuel pushed the steel balls up and locked them so there was no vent, and all the fuel came out, needless to say, on the front of his pants, which he had to be rescued immediately, dumping water on, because you can imagine it probably burned fairly well. The balls were stuck in there so hard that we had to go in with a broom handle and try to release them.
Now, these are the balls in the tank now?
Yeah. All four of them were in trouble.
Racers are clever, but they're not always smart.
The greatest racing I ever enjoyed was Can-Am and TransAM. Things are different today with BOP and all the restrictions and tighter formulas. Every race almost feels like a spec race. It's not nearly as enjoyable. I wonder if anyone would care to comment, or if you ever see this changing. Ingenuity and creativity are gone.
I get why it's happened, but I was telling you beforehand, what it's done is it's undermined the actual reason that racing was invented, which was to find out who the best was. You wonder why people aren't as into it, because you used to be able to tell if that guy was going 50 feet deeper before he hit the brakes. You knew it was because he and his team were doing a better job of it. And now on these weekends, it's whether the BOP is tipped in your favor. I think they've got to figure something out. Again, I mean, equivalency formulas are really, really hard to do. You know, NASCAR learned more or less have a standard body, which is cookie cutter a little bit, but the teams are allowed to work hard and come up with their own. They got to keep putting them back in their box a little bit, but they're allowed to innovate. I joke that Lemons Racing, the $500 shit boxes, pardon my French, is the most innovation in racing right now, because everybody goes to one of those races and they come back, they go, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to get a so-and-so Celica, and I'm going to cut all the fenders off to save weight, and so it's all they've got to figure out a way to get some of the creativity and innovation back. I agree. It's not a simple answer, but the market is never wrong, and if everybody loses interest, they'll get serious again about bringing some of that back. I'm not sure what the answer is, but I think this is not it.
It really is a real problem, because I have not talked to Roger Penske about this lately, but I know how he thinks. That to get into a racing series and know that if you go 1/10 of a second quicker than the next guy, they're going to add weight to your car for the next race. If you get 3 more horsepower than somebody else, they're going to do something to you. I don't know where it all ends up, and I'm sure a guy like, not that he's ever said this to me, but a guy like Roger is like, why am I going to get involved in that series? Because as soon as you even win a race, they penalize you. It's a problem.
I think one of the things that's happened is that tires are so good now, especially when it came into radial tires. And now when you watch the cars, they're not really that dramatic, because, I mean, they're going really fast, but you don't see any movement in the car. Where you look back at when the bi-splide, the cross-ply tires.
Movies, you can see the cars moving around.
Exactly, it's exciting, yeah. You know, when radials came along, it was important for Goodyear and everyone to make radial race tires now to show what they can do. But I think we're past the point where anyone believes that the race tires really relate to the street tires. So I think they should just go back to cross-ply tires and make them intentionally with big slip angles. So the car
don't want to drive?
Well, no, I'm retired now, so I can say that. and that would also, I think, help with a lot of the like Formula One and such. To get a lap time, if you had to have the car sideways a lot, that would reduce a lot of the aerodynamic. Yeah, you have to have a car that's good in yaw.
So that's the engineer to tell us why that would or wouldn't be a good idea.
No, I'm going to say, while you're doing your rule, you need to have 8-inch rims with 12-inch tires.
Right.
So these guys, Chuck and his company had to take a body grinder to the leaf spring in the back so the tire would clear the spring, essentially, and every time, no matter how far they ground it away, they'd come back and there'd be tire marks, essentially, on the spring.
Also interesting to think where the modern tire came from. Don't forget, in Indianapolis, as late as, I don't know what years it would have been, probably somewhere along in the 60s, there was one guy that had a car with some really wide tires, but I think Mickey Thompson, but really, along about that same time, I was doing test work at Jim Hall's racetrack in Midland, Texas, with a tire test machine where we had this machine that we could put tires in. We could put different rim widths, We could have different weights on the tires. We could measure the slip angles, change the camber. We could do all kinds of things. And I would spend hours on this. And one day, apparatus I had, it typically was 6 inches, 8 inches wide tires. And so I had room, so I put 2 tires in there side by side. And all at once, it's a whole new era. And that I don't know, but I think that may have been the start of wide tires. Maybe other people were working at the same time, maybe Firestone was, maybe Goodyear was. But I remember distinctly going to Goodyear and asking them to make a 12-inch wide tire. And they were like, why do you want that? And that was the beginning of what we're facing today. And so we went back to narrower tires. It would end up with more exciting racing.
I think today, correct me if I'm wrong, tires are pretty much spec tires you can only get. Back then, I think they were able to contact Goodyear or Firestone and say, hey, build me a tire. It was very competitive, very secretive about the tire situation.
There is a spec tire in most series, but like in GTLM now, there is no spec tire. Michelin has run almost everybody off, but Dunlop is like over in Europe, Dunlop, there is a tire war. Wherever there's a tire war, that stuff still happens.
Really? So they can still go and get special treatment. I know Michelin does. I've heard that.
What you have is when you get one group that is so good that they don't leave crumbs for anyone else, eventually people leave. So that's actually why some of these rules for equalizing, everybody needs to get a trophy. So they there's, I get why it comes. You're not careful, it undermines the whole point.
But back in the day, I do remember the tire wars and the secrecy of the tires that Penske had. I remember Chuck was part of this story. Peter Gregg showed up in the series, and he had this young guy who was hanging out with him, ended up being Hurley Haywood. And we didn't know Hurley at the time, but we watched. I saw Hurley standing at the Penske pits, and he's marking down the numbers of the tires. And I saw him doing that. And I said to Chuck, I said, hey. And he said, okay, let's follow him. So we followed Hurley, and we see he's heading towards the Bruno's pit, and there's Peter facing us, and he's laughing, and he says, Hurley, they're following you. I had to see where exactly this information was going, but it was very competitive at time wars.
During the IndyCar tire war, Firestone, they wouldn't let a team take a tire home with them. Because, like Roger would steal people, if someone was getting ready to go, Roger would never leave Goodyear because he was the distributor, but you wouldn't let them have a tire. So they would have to, the teams have to get all their, and they would have a certain set of maybe obsolete ones that they could align the car on, roll it, and so forth. But they were so worried about the technology, both the construction and the compound and the tires, they didn't want them getting out of their hands.
Two things actually. That I think TA2 currently has gone back to bias supply tires.
Correct.
Just for the reasons you guys are talking about. And it is great to watch the slip angles on those cars, which you just don't see today. But I'd also like if Butch and Tommy, you guys both drove prototypes and TransAM cars about the same time. Could you comment on the transition between the two? I mean, generally the TransAM cars you drove were a little more higher downforce than the other cars, but still had to be quite a difference to switch.
It's like anything. It's no different than an engineer that gets a new formula. You've got to basically figure out what makes it work, and that applies to the driving style as well. And that feeds into also the direction you push for with the engineers. And so I was fortunate to drive a lot of different cars coming up. The danger is if you only drive one thing, your style evolves into a very narrow range, and you don't know why it is. You know it's the fastest, but if you haven't had to think about it switching back and forth, I was lucky that I drove some stock cars, I drove some open wheel, and so you had to remind yourself, when you got in it, if you were driving them on the same season or even on the same weekend, you had to remember this one weighs 1,800 pounds and that one weighs 2,600 pounds, or what have you. But generally speaking, you had to drive a high downforce car straighter. You really had to talk to yourself to roll the speed into the corners. That's where the speed was. Again, it's figuring out how to unlock the potential of each one, both the tire and the technical package.
TransAM today, you were talking previously about somebody thought you had traction control, but in TransAM series today, are there cars permitted to have traction?
No. They're still all H pattern, so there's no paddle shifts. No paddle shifts, no electronics allowed. Compare that to the GT3 cars that are in GTD. They have, all the instant cars have full traction control is allowed, but the GT3 cars also have ABS, which, it's good for some of the drivers with less experience.
Yeah.
But TransAM is still all
old school.
So on the other series, which have paddle and ABS, my perception would be the racing would be much more interesting. And also, the poor drivers wash out. And you maybe have less accidents. You might have less adding weight penalty all the time because you...
Well, yeah, I think all of us would agree with that. If I was in charge, and I think probably you guys as well, everything would go back to H-pattern gearboxes, no traction control, no ABS, just because there are reasons why they did it. Car owners love paddle shifts because there's no misshifts with exploding engines, so it gets a lot cheaper that way. But you used to actually be able to have an advantage on somebody. You know, if you were really good on the braking and the downshifting and everything, you know, you could actually have an advantage. Now, I raced the GT3 cars a couple years ago. A dead novice, and to me, having more experience, I couldn't brake any later than anyone, just because everyone just goes, you know, to this number, and just welds their foot to the floor. So it becomes very, you know, kind of what am I doing here? The previous question, I just wanted to add on. I've driven GT cars before, TransAM, and then prototypes. And when I got into TransAM, actually, what I was able to get up to speed was from watching Tommy before, because I remember everyone saying, you had traction control, and I'd go out and watch, and you would see that he was actually just really knew what the car was doing. The TransAM cars, when we raced them, were fixed axle. And so in the middle of the turn, you couldn't do anything. You'd brake really late. In the middle of the turn, you basically had to be off of everything. You didn't dare touch the throttle because it would just drop the rear. It would look cool. You know, and you would see like a lot of people that we were racing would have the back hanging off doing Joe Villeneuve stuff. But Tommy would come off and just like be patient and wait and get the weight transferred. As soon as the weight was transferred, he was gone. Probably looked suspicious, but it was actually just really managing the weight transfer. And so when I started doing it, I just practiced that. Going from a prototype where you just, you know, as soon as you see, you know, that you're going to make it through the turn, you weld your foot to the throttle. With this, you know, you really had to wait until everything was done with the turn and then go.
It used to infuriate me, the traction control allegations. I remember talking to Gary Nelson when he was the technical director of NASCAR, and he actually was the crew chief on the Mellow Yellow car when I drove. And I said, they're all saying I'm cheating. And I said, this is infuriating. They're discrediting all the work we're doing. He says, I know it pisses you off. He says, but you ought to be happy when they say that stuff. He says, because they're never actually going to figure out what you're really doing. Because it's just all the hard work and so forth. And so I love Dorsey to death, but he's a total cowboy. And I mean, spectacular, fun to watch. If you didn't have a stopwatch, you're like, that guy's the fastest. And I used to think, I'm like, is it my job to teach him what's easier on the tires, what's faster, et cetera, et cetera. So it's the way it goes. Smooth doesn't look as good, but it is faster, no question.
Everyone who's watching on live streaming.
Mom.
Glad you were here. Thank you very much.
Again, thank you for this wonderful panel. Terrific job. Thank you very much for your moderator. Thanks again for coming. Let's go on over and support.
This episode is brought to you in part by the International Motor Racing Research Center. Its charter is to collect, share, and preserve the history of motorsports, spanning continents, eras, and race series. The center's collection embodies the speed, drama, and camaraderie of amateur and professional motor racing throughout the world. The center welcomes serious researchers and casual fans alike to share stories of race drivers, race series, and race cars captured on their shelves and walls and brought to life through a regular calendar of public lectures and special events. To learn more about the center, visit www.racingarchives.org. This episode is also brought to you by the Society of Automotive Historians. They encourage research into any aspect of automotive history. The SAH actively supports the compilation and preservation of papers, organizational records, print ephemera, and images to safeguard, as well as to broaden and deepen the understanding of motorized, wheeled land transportation through the modern age and into the future. For more information about the SAH, visit www.autohistory.org. We hope you enjoyed another awesome episode of Break Fix Podcast, brought to you by Grand Touring Motorsports. If you'd like to be a guest on the show or get involved, be sure to follow us on all social media platforms at Grand Touring Motorsports. And if you'd like to learn more about the content of this episode, be sure to check out the follow-on article at gtmotorsports.org. We remain a commercial-free and no annual fees organization through our sponsors, but also through the generous support of our fans, families, and friends through Patreon. For as little as $2.50 a month, you can get access to more behind-the-scenes action, additional pit stop minisodes, and other VIP goodies, as well as keeping our team of creators fed on their strict diet of Fig Newtons, gummy bears, and Monster. So consider signing up for Patreon today at www.patreon.com/GT Motorsports. And remember, without you, none of this would be possible.